From Interfaith Alliance, this is State of Belief Radio. I'm your host, Reverend Welton Gaddy. Hot off the presses, a new Public Religion Research Institute survey conducted in partnership with Religion News Service asked respondents about a topic that's been in the headlines a lot lately. You hardly ever hear about it on this show: religious liberty. Yes, religious liberty. I think the findings are going to surprise you. And here to talk about those findings is PRRI CEO and founder, Dr. Robert P. Jones, whom you know. Robbie, welcome back to State of Belief Radio.
Hi, Welton. Happy to be here.
Man, listen, I'm looking forward to this. The Conference of Catholic Bishops this week reasserted that defending religious liberty in the context of the birth control coverage mandate is their top priority. It's perfect timing, then, that you have been asking Americans about the topic of religious liberty, and the just released results of this survey hold some surprises. So what's the bold-faced headline?
Yeah. Well, as you say, I mean, this is the context that we've been living with for a couple of months now, most prominently, the Catholic bishops, as you say, have been attempting to define the debate on the Obama administration's contraception coverage mandate as a question of religious liberty. So we decided, we'll ask Americans, what do they think about that? Is that really how they see this issue? Is it something, particularly when we ask them an open-ended question, unprompted, is it something that really comes to mind that's driving their concerns? So a couple of things. We found, first of all, most Americans do not believe that religious liberty is under attack, including most Catholics. Nearly 6 in 10 Catholics say that religious liberty is not under attack or not threatened in America today. And when we asked Americans to name, even those who say it was under attack, we asked them, okay, well, tell us in your own words, what is it that you're concerned about? How do you see it being threatened today? Only 6% of those, even among those who said it's being threatened, only 6% named anything remotely clear near to the contraception coverage debate. And in fact, it ranked 6th of 7 categories of concerns on the list.
So that really is the big headline, that people are not worried about what's happening religiously.
Right. Even among those who again, among the minority of Americans who, and it's about 4 in 10 who say that they see religious liberty being threatened in the country, they don't see this contraception mandate coverage as the thing that's driving that threat.
Did you get implicitly, if not explicitly, a sense of what people understand religious liberty to be? Well,
clearly, if you look at what people say the perceived threats are, you get some sense of this. And I brought in some verbatims, and one of the nice things about the survey is we actually asked people in their own words to tell us. We had 1,000 Americans, and we said, tell us what it is when you're concerned about. And we hear really older themes, not these sort of newer themes. We didn't hear much about sexuality issues like same-sex marriage or this contraception debate. We didn't hear much about that. What we heard are these older themes like prayer, removing prayer in school, removing the 10 Commandments from public spaces, working people not being able to say Merry Christmas during the holidays. Those were the kinds of things that we heard really about removing religion from public space in some way, were the most of the concerns that people were bringing to the table.
It seems to me that in terms of messaging, the appeal of Catholic Rick Santorum, that we're dealing with the religious liberty issue here works better with evangelical Protestants and Catholic bishops better than with anyone else. Is that reflected in your survey?
Well, this is a really interesting thing. We've seen this actually in the election campaign where Rick Santorum, who's a Catholic candidate, has really had his strongest appeal not among Catholics but among white evangelical Protestant voters. And particularly we saw his performance in Mississippi and Alabama most recently very strong among those voters. In this poll we see really white evangelical Protestants are the only major religious group that believes that religious liberty is threatened in America today. So that's the group that really is for whom these issues are really resonating strongly, not Catholics. So again, 6 in 10 Catholics say religious liberty is not being threatened in the country today.
So, and tell me again, the group that says it's tends to say that it's threatened?
Yeah, it's white evangelical
It's
Protestants.
white evangelical Protestants.
Right.
So does that mean that mainline Protestants in America think we're all right?
Right. Every other major religious group, white mainline Protestants, Catholics, minority Protestants, all of those groups say that religious liberty is not being threatened in the country today. It really is just this one group of white evangelical Protestants where a strong 61% say that they do believe religious liberty is being threatened in the country today. But as you and I sort of know, this fits actually with a kind of long profile that evangelicals have in the country of sort of feeling at odds with the culture abroad. There's lots of sort of biblical tropes about sort of being in the world but not of it, and sort of being persecuted. And I think those tropes are still alive and well in the white evangelical Protestant world.
As a matter of fact, I think that is a mindset that some people don't understand about evangelicals, is that criticism is welcomed because it means they're really they're walking the narrow way. They're doing the right thing. You did this open-ended question you've already mentioned about threats to religious liberty. I'm curious as to what some of the common answers were.
Yeah. Well, the biggest two categories, really, 23% say something about removing religion from the public square. Again, prayer in school, probably the most frequently mentioned thing in that category. There was another category of kind of general government interference in religion, sort of meddling with what churches can and can't do, those kinds of issues. And then sort of further behind that, at only about 10% really, was a kind of general sense of perception that there's a hostility toward Christians or religion in the culture. But those were really the top three. And again, the contraception mandate is down, at number 6 of 7, 6% citing the contraception mandate.
Well, it's interesting that you also ask about LGBT family rights in terms of religious liberty. What did your study find in this regard?
Yeah. Well, we did want to ask about other areas where religious liberty has been playing a role. And, for example, because the Catholic bishops have been very clear that this religious liberty theme connects, really, for them. It's one of the ways they'll be talking about same-sex marriage and adoption by religiously affiliated social service agencies. So we decided to ask a couple of questions about how Americans connected the dots there. What's interesting about take adoption by gay and lesbian couples, that 63% of Americans, so more than 6 in 10, say that religiously affiliated agencies that receive federal funding should not be able to refuse to place children with gay and lesbian couples. So that's a pretty strong majority. And the key there is federal funding, those who receive federal funding, because we also asked about those agencies who do not receive any federal funding, and there the country is basically divided about whether they should be able to refuse or not to refuse to place children with gay and lesbian couples. But it's very clear that the country is, in solid majority territory, 63% saying that any agency, religiously affiliated or not, that receives federal money should not be able to refuse to place children with gay and lesbian couples.
You know what's really interesting about that is, because I was going to circle back and ask this anyway, it's strange that in the examples that you gave of people's primary concerns, federal funding was not one of those.
Right, yeah.
And that's one of the key concerns, I think, with religious liberty organizations today. It plays out in the LGBT question, but not in the more general question.
Yeah, it wasn't something that people sort of brought to mind when we just asked them in an open-ended way. But, we do see a pattern when we asked about more detailed questions about the contraception coverage, because we also asked in this survey a whole range of organizations, like should these be required to provide contraception coverage at no cost to their employees. And Americans really do make a distinction between churches on the one hand, where virtually every group says, no, those groups should be exempt, and other kinds of religiously affiliated agencies, but they tend to make a distinction between those who have broader missions and receive federal money, have a broader range of employees, and those who sort of are more tightly tied to kind of churches and church missions. They're more willing to let churches sort of have their own way here, and they're more willing to say, Americans overall, most Americans say, whether it's religiously affiliated social service agencies, colleges, religiously affiliated hospitals, they're all in majority territory with all Americans saying, yeah, those should be required to provide health care coverage that includes contraception at no cost.
Robbie, at least on State of Belief, you and I are out as Baptists. I mean, we've identified ourselves in that way, so people know that there is a long tradition of interest in religious freedom for us. Given that fact, did this survey surprise you, or did it confirm what you already thought?
Well, I think it was surprising to me, actually, how few people cited the contraception mandate, given how much coverage this has gotten over the last couple of months. It's clearly the thing at the top of the news cycle. So to me, I mean, one of the surprising things was just how low it ranks and how much these older themes, really, that are 40 years old about, kind of court cases over prayer, teacher-led prayer in school and the Ten Commandments and where they can and can't be placed. Those are still the resonating issues animating this debate. So, I mean, I would say, like, what we have here is not something new. We have these kind of very old themes carrying through. The contraception mandate debate really hasn't moved the needle on this.
So that really is an overall conclusion that we need to be aware of as to where people are and their understanding of it and around what issues. Just as important, what can you say about the relentless use of that phrase religious freedom by conservative religious and political leaders in recent months to attack President Obama?
Well, we asked about this to see whether, in general, without attaching it to an issue, and I would say that, so far it seems to be falling flat, really, among Americans. Again, I mean, we don't have majorities of Americans. We don't even have majorities of Catholics who have been really most, I think, hit with this message from the bishops and through church letters that have been circulated to the churches. And again, we just don't see Catholics getting up in arms about this. We don't see the public again. It really is, the same groups that we would have expected before any of this new controversy. It's white evangelical Protestants that have the most concerns here. Catholics, look about like the general population on this question.
I don't know that I'm going to say this right. I hope I do. But isn't it ironic that I'm thinking of mainline Protestants? Mainline Protestants would tend to be scared to death of Santorum. But they're not worried about religious freedom, according to your polling.
Right.
On the other hand, you've got Santorum wanting to do all this stuff that would violate religious freedom as we've traditionally understood it, but evangelicals are satisfied that that he can do that because they're concerned that religious freedom doesn't exist.
Right.
Now that's ironic to me.
Yeah, I mean there's lots of ironies, especially around the Santorum campaign. Given we dial back 40, 50 years, I mean the antipathy between evangelicals and Catholics was pretty palpable prior to Kennedy.
Absolutely.
And what we see today is really Santorum is the Catholic candidate who is about as Catholic as they come. He talks about his Catholic faith all the time. He refers to his Catholic faith. And yet, he really is the candidate right now giving voice to really what are evangelical concerns in the country and in the Republican primaries.
And the voters in Alabama and Mississippi in the days when President Kennedy, or prior to that, Senator Kennedy was campaigning, would have had no part of him on any issue because of a friend.
Oh, absolutely. Certainly, you go back to that Houston speech that Kennedy gave in Houston to the Protestant Ministers Association, and particularly I actually went back and looked at the Q&A question that followed the speech. The speech was only, 5-10 minutes long. It was a very short speech, actually. But if you look at the questions and answers that were coming from actually all corners of Protestantism in the South down there, high suspicion, really worried about him taking, commands from the Pope. All the questions were from that angle, really worried about primarily not his policies, but really about his Catholicism and really, pushing him on that question. And you really don't hear any of that with Santorum today.
Dr. Robert P. Jones is CEO and founder of Public Religion Research Institute. Always a source of thoughtful and insightful data regarding key issues in our society today. The new PRRI Religion News Service survey of American views on religious liberty is available at publicreligion.org. Robbie, it is always good, and today is no exception. Thanks for briefing us on these new findings.
Thanks, Welton. I'm always honored to be here.